Yes. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Devadas Hospital, I welcome one and all to the 15th Virtual Teaching Clinics 2.0 webinar initiated by Professor Devadas Sir for the post-graduation teaching. Continuing with the series of successful teaching, I invite and welcome today's guest speaker, Dr. K. Venkatas Sir. Thanks for joining us, sir. A warm welcome to you from one and all. And brief about Sir's introduction. Sir is a well-known pediatric orthopedic surgeon, and he is the HOD of the pediatric unit of Ganga Hospital, Coimbatore. Sir has been trained in USA for hip preservation and limb reconstruction, and he has presented many papers, and he has been awarded with many medals for his presentation in the national conferences, as well as he has got several international publications, and he has authored 3 books chapter as well. So I request Sir is going to share his knowledge about 2 important topics on the pediatric orthopedics. One is the Perthes disease, another is a slipped capital femoral epiphysis. And I request Sir kindly share the screen and start the presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Deepak, for the warm words of introduction. And I would like to thank Dr. Satish Devadas and Professor Devadas for inviting me for this teaching program. So today I'm going to talk about Perthes disease. Perthes is one of the common topics which is important for the residents, both in theory as well as the practical exam. So every practical exam will have at least one patient of Perthes. That's how it works. So in today's talk, I'll give a small brief about Perthes, what are all the various clinical features and classifications available. And I'll tell the management principles, and let's see some cases. We'll run through the cases and we'll try to learn some basic concepts of how to manage a Perthes patient based on the concepts which we learned today. Moving on to definition, it is defined as idiopathic, sectoral or global avascular necrosis of the capital femoral epiphysis. And it's usually due to temporary interruption of blood supply. So it's a simple and straightforward definition, but every word in this is important. So it could be sectoral or global. And we all know that it was described by 3 famous orthopedicians by name Legg, Calve, and Perthes around almost the same time, and hence it is called as Legg-Calve-Perthes disease. It was described about 100 years ago, more than 100 years, but still this disease is also called as a mystery disease because we do not have a clear-cut solution for this problem. And Waldenstrom again contributed to a lot in Perthes disease, with this particularly with this classification about the natural history of the disease. And in the recent times, I would like to add to the history that Harry Kim, who is from TSRH in Texas, has done a lot of contribution to Perthes. He has done many animal experiments, and he's part of the International Perthes Study Group and doing active research in Perthes. And we all know that Dr. Benjamin Joseph, and whenever there is a talk about Perthes, we cannot forego his name. He's done a lot of work in Perthes, and again, he's also a part of International Perthes Study Group, and they're doing active research in this subject. So the incidence is commonly it is seen in 2 to 14 years of age. In the Western population, it comes in a younger age group. So we see a lot of patients between 3 and 5 years in the West. Whereas as far as India is concerned, the children are more than 7 years. There is a typical age group which we see more than 6 or 7 years of age. And male to female preponderance is about 5:1. For some reason, the western coast of India has got it's called actually the Perthes belt of India, and a lot of patients are concentrated in this western coast. And it is reported that the incidence is about 14.4 per 100,000. And in this study was done by again Professor Benjamin Joseph. And 10% of the cases could be bilateral. So it is very rare to see bilateral Perthes, and more so you cannot see a patient with bilateral Perthes with similar stages on both the sides. I'll come to it in subsequent slides. So do we know the etiology? Exact etiology is unfortunately still not known. So we all presume that it is multifactorial. It is said that the child could have genetic susceptibility to develop avascular necrosis, and the environmental factors added onto this genetic susceptibility leads to Perthes disease. And what are all the proposed factors? Repetitive trauma, hyperactivity, and sometimes coagulopathy and thrombophilia, collagenopathy, and these are all proposed theories that it could be causative factors of Perthes. Maternal smoking and passive smoking is also reported to be one of the causative factors. And recently there was a paper from Manipal saying that wood smoke, which they use in the villages for stove, that is also reported to have high incidence of Perthes disease. Let's move on to the pathogenesis. So we all know that the disruption of blood supply to the head is the key event, but we do not know whether it is a single episode or multiple ischemic episodes which leads to avascular necrosis. So in this animal experiment, they actually occluded the vessel which supplies the capital femoral epiphysis in piglets. They tied the vessels and then they subsequently studied all the changes that was happening. And they found that it is just not osteonecrosis. It is not the capital femoral epiphysis alone dies. It's also chondronecrosis. They found that the secondary ossification center also is damaged, and that is the reason why there is usually growth disturbance also seen in Perthes. So the actual pathology which happens is osteoclastic resorption. So majority of the times it is only osteoclastic resorption, and the bone formation is late, which is by creeping substitution, which happens in a very late stage. So this again is an area of interest because some of the researchers are trying to prevent the osteoclast. So with an aim to prevent collapse. So if you prevent the osteoclast by some means, and one of the things which we use in adults is the bisphosphonates. So in children also there are experiments to use bisphosphonates for Perthes disease to prevent osteoclastic resorption and in turn to prevent collapse. So how the head deforms in Perthes? So we know that the head is avascular. That is a primary insult which happens, which leads to avascular necrosis, and that leads to softening of bone. When there is softening of bone and there is articular hypertrophy happens, because of the articular hypertrophy, articular cartilage hypertrophy, there is extrusion. Extrusion is like most of the patients have extrusion, and the head comes out of the acetabular confines. When this happens, and the child is weight bearing and running and jumping and playing, naturally the soft bone deforms. This is during the process deformation happens. And when the blood supply returns, when revascularization happens, when you have extrusion, you will see that the part of the head which is outside is going to deform. So that is the pathology why there is a deformation of head in Perthes. So the treatment is also based on this. So we need to understand this, why the head deforms. And these are all the possible sequelae which can happen in Perthes disease. Because the head is extruded and then there is neovascularization, it can lead to coxa brava. Coxa brava is basically due to problem with the growth. The secondary ossification center of the neck head is insulted, and there is short neck. Coxa brava is nothing but short neck, and here you can see this. There is a sagging rope sign because the head is large, and this is the classical sagging rope sign what you see here. The next is coxa magna. Coxa magna is nothing but a big mushroom shaped head, and the third one is coxa irregularis, where the head is irregular and it is non-concentric joint, which can lead to early osteoarthritis. So in these two scenarios, the joint is concentric, but here it is not concentric. So these are all the possible sequelae of Perthes disease. I have not added on to this. There can be acetabular changes also in Perthes. So there are reports of biconvex acetabulum and acetabular dysplasia also can happen in Perthes as an adaptation to the changes in the femoral head. So these are all the various sequelae which can happen in Perthes. Let's move on to the classification. There are a lot of classification systems which have been described in literature for Perthes disease, and as postgraduates, it is important to have a clear idea about at least these 4 basic classification systems, which is important. So whenever there is a theory question about classification of Perthes, you are expected to write all these at least. So first is Salter and Thompson classification, which is based on the extent of subchondral fracture line seen in AP and lateral view. So if the fracture line is less than 50%, it is group A, and if it is more than 50%, it is called group B. And second is the Cattrall classification, which is very popular among examiners. Usually they ask Cattrall, what is Cattrall classification? It goes in classes actually. Class 1 is if there is 25% of head involvement, less than 25%, and class 2 is 25 to 50%, and class 3 is more than 50%. And class 4 is the entire head is involved, 100% of the head is involved. The third classification, which came on later, is Herring's lateral pillar classification. The definition of lateral pillar is the lateral third of the capital femoral epiphysis. You divide the head into 3 equal parts, and the lateral 1/3 is called the lateral pillar. So based on the integrity of the lateral pillar, he came with 4 types. Type A, where the lateral pillar is intact. You have avascular necrosis, but the lateral pillar is still intact. In type B, the lateral pillar is collapsed, but it's still more than 50% of the pillar is intact. The loss is less than 50%. In type C, there is more than 50% loss of lateral pillar. So it's a very simple and straightforward classification, but late in 2006, they felt that there is some intermediate form between B and C, and they called it as B bar C. And you can see that the collapse is approximately 50%, and the pillar could be thin and irregular. So this is one add-on to the existing original lateral pillar classification of A, B, and C. The next and the most important classification, which is important in many ways to have a good understanding of Perthes disease, is the Waldenstrom's classification. So the Waldenstrom's original classification had 4 stages, which is stage of avascular necrosis, stage 1. Stage 2 is the fragmentation stage, and stage 3 is the regenerative stage, and stage 4 is the remodeling stage. So this actually gives the natural history, how the Perthes disease evolves in a patient. So later on, the modification was brought about by Professor Benjamin Joseph. So if you had to take one important aspect from my talk, I think you should learn what is modified Waldenstrom staging. That is actually the essence of the whole talk. So I will go in little more detail about modified Waldenstrom staging. So he divided the initial 4 stages described by Waldenstrom into 7 different stages, subdivided each into 2. Stage 1A is early avascular necrosis, where the entire epiphysis is avascular, and you can see that there is sclerosis, but there is no collapse. In stage 1B, there is collapse. So from stage 1A, it goes to stage 1B, where you can see that there is flattening of the capital femoral epiphysis. Stage 2A is early fragmentation. So after it becomes flat, you can see one fissure here, which is early fragmentation. 2B is late fragmentation, where you can see 2 or more fissures. So this is very simple and straightforward. From 2B, you move on to 3A, which is early reconstitution, where you can see that there is new bone formation on the lateral 1/3 of the growth plate. So this is stage 3A, or early reconstitution. And next is 3B, which is late reconstitution. So where you can see that almost the entire capital femoral epiphysis is now regenerated. And stage 4 is remodeling, where the disease is completely healed. So this actually forms the essence of understanding of Perthes disease, of how the child presents, as well as how we go about managing these children. And it is important that you read the natural history article, which was published by Professor Benjamin Joseph, in which they have studied about 700 children with Perthes disease consequentially, and then they have came out with this classification, as well as the natural history and how to intervene these children, in what stage, what should be done. Let's move on to a question for the postgraduates. Is it okay to have a poll now, Shabina? I think she has already started the poll.
Yes, sir, we will take it.
Yeah. So head risk signs is one of the, again, common questions which is asked in Vivas. If you get a Perthes case or in table Viva, so it is a popular question. Can you all vote? A is lateral subluxation of the femoral head. B, radiolucent V in the lateral aspect of epiphysis. C is subchondral fracture line. D, calcification lateral to the epiphysis, and E is horizontal physeal line. All of these are headed risk signs except one.
So should we share the results now or later?
Yeah, Shamina, you can share the results just to know how much
knowledge they have about it.
the response is.
So-
Yeah. Subchondral fracture, that's the right answer. About 50% of them have got it right. Good. So let's move on. So headed risk signs is one of the common questions which is asked. That's why I put this. The other thing which you need to know is the outcome measures, what is based on the Stulberg's classification, which was published in 1981. You have 5 classes again in this. Basically, class 1 and 2, you have spherical head. Class 3 is the head is ovoid, and class 4 and 5, the head is flat. So if you have class 1 and 2, generally the outcome is good and the hip is almost normal and you expect a normal life for the hip. Whereas 4 and 5, we know that the hip is not concentric and the chance of developing early arthritis is more. Sort of in between is class 3. And recently, there is one more measure for outcome, which is called as the sphericity deviation score. So if someone of you are doing thesis or planning to do dissertation in Perthes disease, you can use this as the outcome measure because it is a very objective method and not subjective like Stulberg's classification. This was again published from Manipal by Hitesh Shah. I'm not going to go into the details of it. Just you need to know that there is something called sphericity deviation score, which measures the roundedness of the femoral head. It might be asked in a recent advances question for you. Let's move to the clinical features. We all know that pain and limp are the most common complaints which the child presents with Perthes disease. So painless limp is the common presentation. And sometimes rarely the child can present with knee pain. And it is not uncommon in our setup to see that the patients or the parents always say that there is a history of trauma and then the child developed pain. And if you look at the signs, usually limp will be there. They can have decreased range of motion, particularly in early stages when they present with synovitis, there could be a lot of muscle spasm and decreased range of motion, and they'll have resistance to log roll also. And you need to understand that the clinical presentation also depends on what stage the child presents to you. So in early stages, the limp and pain may be variable, and often it can be mild and intermittent when just the disease starts when there is avascular necrosis. Whereas when they move on to early fragmentation and late fragmentation, pain as well as the limp both worsens. Usually our patients present in this stage, and there is some restriction of movement also, because commonly there will be extrusion. Whenever there is extrusion, there will be restriction of abduction as well as internal rotation. When they move on to stage 3, usually pain decreases and limp also decreases in some patients based on what age the disease starts. If it is in a younger age, usually the limp also will decrease, but it is in an older age, limp tends to persist in this stage also. And range of motion, again, if it is in a younger age, the range of motion also will improve, but in an older age, the range of motion will be restricted in stage 3 as well. Whereas in stage 4, when the disease is healed, there will be occasional limp, and some of the patients may have occasional locking. But many patients whom we see in stage 4 present with what we call as the femoroacetabular impingement because of the mismatch between the size of the head and the acetabula. So it is called the secondary femoroacetabular impingement due to Perthes disease. So the clinical feature also again depends upon what stage the child presents to us. Moving on to the differential diagnosis, there is a whole list of differential diagnoses which is given in the textbook, but the important ones are multiple epiphyseal dysplasia, spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia, sickle cell disease, and mucopolysaccharidosis, which is commonly Gaucher's presents as Perthes disease, and hypothyroidism. So these are the 5 things which you need to remember. And whenever you see a child with bilateral Perthes disease, you should always have an alarm bell ringing in your mind that you should not think about Perthes, but you should rule out the other causes of where you can have bilateral avascular necrosis, particularly multiple and the MED and SCD are the common causes. So as we discussed earlier, bilateral Perthes is very rare. Let's move to the treatment. So the treatment goals are again straightforward. We want to get a spherical head, which is a round head, and it should be well covered. We want the head to be covered, and we want the joint to be concentric. We don't want an incongruous joint. And more importantly, we should have an impingement-free range of motion. So all these four forms the ultimate treatment goals while you see a Perthes disease child. So to achieve the goal, you should understand the natural history, which we saw already. And you also should know what are all the prognostic factors which influences the treatment, and also the effectiveness of various treatment methods, because there are a lot of treatment methods described. You should know the effectiveness and choose the right treatment for the right patient. So this is popularly called as the Perthes clock, where you have the various stages. This is from the original paper by Dr. Benjamin Joseph, which was published in 2012 actually. So stage 2B in this clock is called the watershed zone. Before that, in stage 1A, 1B, and 2A, till that stage, we can do what we call as the preventive intervention. By this, we mean that you can do an active intervention to prevent deformation of the head. So that is called preventive intervention. From stage 2B onwards, the damage has happened. So from 2B and 3A, the intervention, it is called as remedial intervention. So you do some procedure to give a remedy. In 3B and 4, there's already remodeling has started. So there is no way that you can prevent deformation. So what you call it as the salvage intervention. So this is actually the original description, which was given as preventive, remedial, and salvage. So I personally feel that if you see a child in 2B or 3A, whatever intervention we do are not actually a remedy. So we are trying to accommodate the deformity. So I term it as adaptive intervention. Whereas in stage 3B and 4, previously people called it as salvage interventions. But now I don't think there is a right terminology, because with the advancements in the hip preservation field, I think the hip has more life. So I would prefer to call it as corrective intervention rather than salvage intervention. So what are all the strategies? What do we mean by preventive strategy? We are trying to retain the sphericity and have a normal morphology. Whereas in the remedial surgeries, we try to accommodate the deformity. Whatever damage has already happened, we try to do something to accommodate it. So we'll come to that in detail. So that is called remedial. And in salvage, you change the shape and size of the head, which has already the remodeling has happened, and the head is either big or irregular, or whatever change has happened, you try to normalize. Basically, you are trying to normalize the morphology of the proximal femur and acetabulum. So, and that is actually why I call it as a corrective strategy. So let's have the next question of poll. Which of the following is containment surgery described for Perthes? A is varus derotation osteotomy, B Saltus, C triple, and D all of the above. You can launch the results after it's done. Again, most of them have got the right answer, and again, there is no doubt about it. All the three are containment surgeries, which is described for Perthes. So I'm going to go into the details now. So what do we mean by preventive strategy? Preventive strategy is actually you are trying to preserve the head. You are trying to prevent deformation of the head. So the only strategy which is available right now is called containment. What do we mean by containment? You are trying to contain the femoral head inside the acetabulum, within the confines of the acetabulum. So you have two types of containment. One is non-surgical containment. The other is surgical containment. In non-surgical, you have braces. You have Atlanto brace, you have TLSO brace, and even your the broomstick plaster. All that where you keep the child's leg abducted with an aim to contain the femoral head is called a non-surgical method of containment. In surgical containment, you have two different options. One is femoral osteotomy and the other is acetabular osteotomy. On the femoral side, the most popular surgery is the varus derotation osteotomy. On the acetabular side, either you can do a Salter or a triple innominate osteotomy. Both are described, and there are different centers which are practicing different types of osteotomies. So what exactly happens in a containment surgery? So let's presume that this is the area of avascular necrosis. So when you abduct and internal rotate, the area of necrosis goes inside the acetabulum and it is contained. You cut the bone and you straighten it now. So this is varus derotation osteotomy. Whereas in a Salter or triple, you cut the acetabulum and bring it over the femoral head. So this is the other way around. So basically the idea is the same. You create a kind of over coverage for the head, and when the revascularization happens, the head forms within the confines of the acetabulum and a round head will form. So that is the idea of doing a containment surgery. But you need to understand when you can do containment. I'll come to that in a little while. The second type of intervention is called the remedial intervention, which I am changed into adaptive intervention. Here, what we do is actually we try to accommodate the deformity or the abnormality, but we don't correct it. So if the head is big, we make the cup also big by doing a shelf osteobuloplasty or a Chiari osteotomy. And if there is a hinged abduction, we do not correct what is causing the hinged abduction, but we try to play around it by doing a valgus osteotomy. So we are just trying to adapt the problem. So that is called adaptive surgeries. The third strategies are called corrective surgeries, where usually it is done after complete healing of the disease, and it aims to normalize the morphology, and in turn we restore the biomechanics of the hip joint. So these are called corrective interventions. And again, you can have femoral side surgeries as well as acetabular side surgeries. As we discussed in the pathogenesis, the problem can be isolated in the femur in terms of coxa magna, breva, or irregularis, or sometimes you can have an acetabular side problem also in terms of dysplasia or a bilobed acetabulum. So when you are trying to normalize the morphology, it is important that you address both the sides. So in the femur, if your neck is short, coxa breva is one of the common problems. So you do what neck lengthening osteotomies. So previously people used to do Wagner's osteotomy or Mosher's osteotomy. I'm not going to go into the details of these osteotomies. This was given very well in Tachjian. But of late, now we are more commonly doing what we call as the relative neck lengthening. The second problem, what we see is the hinged abduction, and for that we do osteochondroplasty on the femoral head. The third is coxa magna, where you can do a head reduction osteotomy to decrease the size of the head. Your head is big, you decrease the size of the head. And on the acetabular side, if you have dysplasia which is associated with it, then you have to do a periacetabular osteotomy, PAO. So these procedures are done in isolation or in combination. So depending upon what is there for the child or that particular patient, it is a tailor-made solution. It is not that we do only femoral osteochondroplasty or only RNL. So it can be a combination of these surgeries. We'll see some examples now. Before going on to the examples, we have to understand what are the other factors which influence the treatment. One is age of the child. Second is stage of the disease. Third, whether there is extrusion or not. And fourth, the movements of the hip joint. So these are the four variables which you need to consider while you are deciding the treatment for a particular patient. Let's see one by one. In age, I prefer to group them into three. So you can have a child less than 7 years as one group, 7 to 12 years the other group, and more than 12 years is the other group, the third group. So why is it important? In less than 7 years, generally the healing is very good. The disease, natural history of the disease is very good, and there is no indication to do prophylactic containment. Whereas in late onset Perthes, what we call as the Perthes, which starts after 7 years, which is commonly seen in our country, there is a role for prophylactic containment. And in this age group, when you see the child at 9-10 years, most of them will be in stage 2B or 3A. You can do adaptive surgeries as well. More than 12 years, usually it is in stage 3A or stage 3B or 4, and where you are doing only corrective surgeries. And you have to remember that we are not talking about late or very late onset Perthes, or also called as adolescent Perthes, which can present after 12 years also. So this is just an outline for you to understand. Less than 7 years, there is no indication for prophylactic containment. 7 to 12 years, there is an indication to do prophylactic containment, and more than 12 years, generally we do corrective surgeries. Stage of the disease, we already saw this. Stage 1A and stage up to 2A, you can do prophylactic containment. 2B and 3A, we do adaptive surgeries, or sometimes in 2B, when you see a child, there are different schools of thought again. There are people who do containment for 2B also. And stage 3B and 4, corrective surgeries are indicated. The next is movements. If you are planning to do a containment surgery, it is essential that the movements need to be normal. If you have restriction of movement, again, you need to see why there is restriction of movement and decide the plan accordingly. If there is, most often, if you see a child between this 7 to 12 years age group in stage 2A, let's say, when you want to do containment, but you have restriction of movement, most often it will be due to only muscle spasm. And if you put the child on traction for a month, the range of motions will come back. Whereas if you see a child in 3B or 4 with restriction of movement, it will be a completely different ballgame. It could be either a hinged abduction, or in a heel disease, it can be a femoroacetabular impingement. So you have to decide based on what the child is actually having. And again, if you go on to extrusion, whether there is extrusion or not, based on that, your treatment plan is again going to change. So this is actually a good treatment summary, which was again given by Dr. Benjamin Joseph, which was published in Indian Journal of Orthopedics, when to contain and when to not to contain. So based on the various variables which we described, if a child is more than 7 years and it is in the stage of 1A, B, and 2A, and more than half of the epiphysis is involved, and with this, you have to contain. And in a child who is less than 7 years with extrusion, again, containment is indicated. And you have to remember that whenever you plan for containment surgery, you should look at the range of motion of the hip joint, and it should be normal. So in children less than 7, there is no indication to contain without extrusion. And stage 3A, 3B, and 4, we have already missed the boat, or the die is already cast. So the damage has already happened, and again, there is no indication to do containment surgery. So this is again a good table of summary of treatment in Perthes disease. So with this, we'll move on to case examples to know how much you have understood based on this talk. Can we have the poll now? This is a 6-year-old child. Please have a close look at the X-ray. And the question is there. What would you do for this child? Option A is abduction brace. Option B is observation and regular follow-up. Option C is varus derotation osteotomy. And option D is masterly inactivity. So this is one of the important terms which we learned when we were doing post-graduation. Masterly inactivity. That's nice to know. About 50% of them have got the right answer. Still 30% have told abduction brace. So let us see. So if you look into this child is less than 7 years. He is in stage 1A. There is avascular necrosis, but there is no collapse. There is no extrusion, and range of motion is normal. Of course, I did not give the clinical findings. So there is no indication for prophylactic containment. There is no extrusion. So we saw that in age less than 7 years, if there is extrusion, you have to contain. If there is no extrusion, there is no need for a containment procedure. Some of them have put as abduction brace. So this just needs regular follow-up. You cannot say that the child is stage 1A, so nothing will happen. and you cannot afford to see the child after 1 or 2 years. It is important to have a close observation, and the recommended observation interval is usually 4 months. Why 4 months? Because again, based on the natural history, we know that each stage is about 4 months. So that is the reason why we usually see the child within either 3 or 4 months interval. And this child in 6 months, you can see that it is already fragmented, and 1 year later, it's healing well. And that's at 2 years, completely healed, and that's the longer follow-up. You can see that without doing anything, the disease has resolved. So in children, most of the children who are less than 6 years, this will be the natural history of the disease. Having said that, you should know that some of them can extrude and may need containment procedures, either a non-surgical or a surgical containment. So non-surgical containment does not work in our hands well. Particularly, our patients are not very compliant and they will not come for regular follow-ups. So whenever it comes to containment, we prefer to do a varus derotation osteotomy. A femoral osteotomy is the preferred containment procedure in our hands. Let's move to the next case. So have a close look at the X-rays again. He's an 8-year-old child. He's having a mild pain in the left hip, and clinically he's having a full range of movement. Maybe, yeah. So you have the questions. What would you do? A is abduction brace. B is master inactivity. C is varus derotation osteotomy, and D is observation and regular follow-up. Yeah. 46% of them have told abduction brace, which is not a wrong answer, I would say. 37% have put varus derotation osteotomy. 6% master inactivity, and 11%. So the problem is actually with this 17% who have. So both abduction brace and varus derotation osteotomy are correct. We cannot say that abduction brace is a wrong answer. The idea here is that so the disease is in the child is more than 7 years, stage 2A, and I would say that there is extrusion, which is questionable, but I feel that there is extrusion already, and there is a need for containment in this child. The range of motion is normal, and how you contain it is up to you to decide. The problem with non-operative containment by using braces is again the compliance issue is one side. The other side of it is like it is going to go on for long time. The child practically he can't go to school for say up to 6 months time. So all those things are practical issues. So there are centers in the US who stringently follow bracing protocols, and they have shown very good results with non-operative containment. But it is very, very difficult to reproduce the same results in our center. So as long as you have a good counseling with the parents and they agreed for everything, then probably you can go ahead and do a non-operative form of containment and have a close follow-up with the child, because basically it is going to do the same thing. And all this 4 to 6 months time, the child should not go for playing, walking, and all that. No. Of course, he can walk for daily regular activities, but running and all is not allowed. So we have found that it is very practically very difficult to follow a non-operative form of containment in our setup. So this child was treated in this way with a varus derotation osteotomy. It's a very simple and sound solution for this problem. This is a 9-month follow-up of the same child. You can see that the osteotomy has healed well, and the disease also is healing very well. And that's the 4-year follow-up. You can see that the hip is almost normal. So a few words about varus derotation osteotomy. The problem is you have to understand that you can do a varus derotation osteotomy up to 10 years in girls, more than 10 years, and boys more than 12 years. If you go ahead and do a varus derotation osteotomy, there is a chance that your osteotomy may not remodel and they may be left out with a permanent Trendelenburg gait. So you should always think twice, look at the age of the child and then decide about how you are going to contain. So, but most of our patients will be in this age group and they are amenable for a containment procedure in the form of varus derotation osteotomy. Let's move on to the third case. So this is a 9-year-old boy who is having symptoms for 5 months. This is the X-ray. I hope you're able to see, it's not very clear. So this child is more than 7. He is in stage 2B. There is extrusion and he's having a restriction of movement as well. So this is the arthrogram picture of the same child. You can see that this is neutral and this is abduction. Let's move on to the question. What would you do in this child? Option A is preventive intervention. Option B is adaptive. C is corrective and D is none of the above. Corrective intervention 53%. 44% have got the right answer as adaptive intervention. So we have to remember that corrective as well. Usually corrective intervention is described only for the late stages like 3B and 4. So whenever we do corrective intervention, usually we prefer to have the complete healing of disease. So, but here you can see that, I'll move to the slide. Yes, not moving. Yeah. So here the disease has not healed yet completely. It is in 2B. There is no reossification also. So this is neutral position. This is abduction. This is actually hinging here. You can see whenever you see a medial dye pooling in abduction, which means that this is actually a typical picture of what we call as hinged abduction, where your head is hinging in the margin of the acetabulum and it opens up like this. You have a gap on the medial side here. So this is called as hinged abduction. And when you adduct, you can see that it is sitting nicely. The femoral head is now contained in the acetabulum nicely and hinging is not there. So this is if you have to do something, the problem here is they will have restriction of abduction. Because of hinging, the child will not be able to sit cross-legged. They will not be able to abduct. So that is one of the common complaints in our society. The child is not able to sit cross-legged. So, and this is a good indication to do an adaptive intervention in form of a valgus osteotomy. So you keep it in adduction and then you do a subtrochanteric osteotomy and valgus it and fix it to the plate. The child now will have abduction because your hinging is gone. So that's why exactly why I call it as an adaptive surgery and not a remedial surgery, or not giving a permanent remedy here. The head is deformed here, it is extruded here, then that is what is causing the hinged abduction. And we are not doing anything to this problem. We are just trying to get around it by doing a valgus osteotomy. So that's why we call it as adaptive intervention. Corrective intervention can be done for this in form of osteochondroplasty, but we preferably do not do it in stage 2B. Whenever you think of corrective intervention, usually it is in 3B or 4. So in this stage, if you don't want to do an adaptive intervention, you can always tell the child to come back after the healing of the disease. That's what I do. I do not do valgus osteotomy personally. I tell the children and the child and the parents to wait for some more time for the disease to heal and then do the intervention later on. So that is one of the ways to look at it. So case 4, this is a 14-year-old boy. And you can see that the child is having a Perthes disease on the left side. And this is a good example to see the acetabulum. So this is called bilobed acetabulum or biconcave acetabulum. You can see changes in the acetabulum as well. And the head is completely collapsed, fragmented, and there is extrusion also. What will you do? 14-year-old boy, and the complaints wise is having pain, limp, and restriction of movement. Everything is there. VDO, shelf, osteochondroplasty, head reduction osteotomy. I'm glad 57% have got the right answer. Head shelf osteoplasty. 30% of them have written as osteochondroplasty. Again, so osteochondroplasty and head reduction are corrective interventions, which we again prefer to do in 3B or 4. Here you can see that there is newborn formation is 3A, age is more than 12. There is extrusion and restriction of movement is there definitely, because again there is some kind of hinging which is happening. And in this, if you have to accommodate it, you can do a shelf acetabuloplasty. That was what was done for this patient. The shelf augmentation is nothing but you are increasing the volume of the acetabulum. You are supporting the uncovered portion of the head by putting a bone graft here. It's also called as labral shelf acetabuloplasty. And there are various techniques to do shelf. So this is a simple shelf which we have done here. There are augmented shelf acetabuloplasty where you can put a plate to hold the graft also. So that is also described. So basically, after anesthesia, you'll be able to see that the child is getting some range of movement. You can do an adductor tenotomy. Most of them will have adductor contracture in this stage. So in this stage, so you do an adductor tenotomy and arthrogram, see the head, and you can add on a shelf. This is shelf post-op X-ray, and this is 6 months follow-up. So you support it here, and the shelf is nicely incorporated. Now your acetabulum volume is increased to accommodate the big head. And that's the 1.5 year follow-up. Not a great result, but definitely the child is not having immediate symptoms. His range is okay. His hip is mobile and it is stable. And definitely it will need some kind of intervention in form of total hip later on when he develops arthritis. For time being, he is working with. This is a sort of adaptive intervention which we have done for this 14-year-old boy who presented in a real bad state. Let's move on. Now we'll have a 15-year-old girl. So she gives history of surgery at 8 years of age. Probably, we do not know, probably she had a varus derotation osteotomy. You can see one screw there. At present, the complaint is limp. She's having a limp. She's not having much pain, but she says that she can't walk for long distance. When she walks long distance, she gets pain on the lateral aspect, which is typical of a fatigue pain. Whenever your abductor mechanism is compromised, you get the fatigue pain. So that is the complaint which she presents. So I did not put a poll question for this. Anyways, can any one of you answer? What would you do in this child? The child is having normal range of movements. Before I show the slide, what was done, I'll pick someone. How to see the participants? Shamina?
Yes, sir.
Can you ask one of your postgraduates to answer?
Dr. Deepak, sir.
Hello.
Okay. So if it is very cumbersome, we'll move on. No problem. I think a lot of other people also are there.
Yeah, the issue is they are the attendees. They will not be able to
Unmute themselves.
answer on.
Okay, no problem. So if you look at the various variables, the child is more than 12. It's in stage 4, where the disease is completely healed. There is no extrusion. Luckily, there is no extrusion, and the movements are normal. The problem here is only the high riding trochanter, and because of that, there is a Trendelenburg lurch which the child is having. And this is a good case to do what we call as the relative neck lengthening. I'm not going to go into the technical details. Basically, it is like a distal trochanteric transfer. Previously, it was called as a graded trochanter transfer, but There is some technical modification in that, and we call this as a relative neck lengthening, which is a very good surgery for this condition. You can see that the biomechanics is completely restored. Your abductors have come down below the center of the femoral head, and this is the healing at 6 months, and this is about a year and a half, and she's doing well without any limp. This is the next patient, 15-year-old boy, again with a coxa magna. You can see that the disease is healed completely, and the child is more than 12. The disease in stage 3B or stage 4. There is extrusion and there is restriction of movements because of the big head. The abduction is restricted. So this is again an indication to do a corrective intervention, or what was previously called as salvage surgeries. So in this particular patient, what we did was called the head reduction osteotomy through a surgical dislocation approach. So here for head reduction, you need to know that the central part of the head should be necrotic and the other two sides are good cartilage is there. So you remove the necrotic part, or you can see that the X-ray again, this part is not, it does not have a good cartilage. So essentially we removed this part of the head and decreased the size of the head. So it's called head reduction osteotomy, and then you fix it with screws. And some of the patients who need head reduction osteotomy will have associated acetabular dysplasia. For this child, there was dysplasia, but the joint was not very unstable. So we did not do a periacetabular osteotomy for this child. So that's the 6 weeks follow-up. The osteotomy has healed well, and that's a 2-year follow-up. So we do not know how long this hip will last, but definitely this, I would not prefer to call it as a salvage operation, and rather than call it as a corrective strategy where we are trying to normalize the morphology of the hip as well as the normalize the biomechanics of the hip joint. Yet another patient, slightly, no, the age is on the higher side, 19-year-old boy who had childhood Perthes and has come with coxa magna with coxa brava. Both are there, the short neck as well as a big head. So contrary to the previous patient, you can see that the head, the central part of the head necrosis is not much here. The cartilage looks all right in the center here. So he needs a different kind of intervention. So if you put it in the variable chart, he's more than 12, stage 4, there is no extrusion and there is restriction of movements because of impingement. So this is a classical example of secondary femoroacetabular impingement. And what we did is osteochondroplasty. We removed the part of the head neck junction which was impinging on the acetabulum. We improved the head neck offset and transferred the greater trochanter down. So this is called relative neck lengthening along with the osteochondroplasty. So as I already told you, you can do a combination of procedure for these patients. It need not be one surgery. And that is the 6 weeks follow-up. And these interventions are very good for the patient because they give very good symptomatic relief and they drastically increase the range of movement of the patients, particularly when they present with symptomatic femoroacetabular impingement. If you relieve the impingement, they have very good outcomes, and that's the 2-year follow-up of the same child. I think that is the last case. I can take some questions in Perthes. If there are any questions in the chat box, I can answer now before we move on to the next part.
As of now, there is no question, sir.
Okay. So a few words about recent advances in Perthes for completion's sake. So you also have one paper on recent advances, right? So the current in thing is perfusion MRI in Perthes. This is ongoing study. I mean, actually there are 2 publications which are already published in JBJS by Harry Kim. So what they are doing is they are trying to quantify the amount of avascular necrosis and trying to say that, because we told that there is an indication for prophylactic containment even before the extrusion in more than 7 years of age. So that is a little controversial. So they're trying to quantify whether with perfusion MRI, whether you will be able to quantify how much of the head is avascular even before the changes are seen in X-ray. And based on that, whether you can do early intervention in child. So this is one of the things which is where a lot of active research is happening. The other thing is bisphosphonate. So as I told you already, again, the same guy, Harry Kim, is doing intralesional bisphosphonate injection. It's not like for adult avian, we use alendronate orally. But for this Perthes disease, they are doing experimental studies have shown that if you inject bisphosphonate into the lesion, into the avascular bone, it prevents collapse. Again, this is all in a stage of research and may become standard of care in the future when they enroll a lot of patients. And so just to show the images of how a perfusion MRI looks, and based on this, they have a special software to quantify the amount of avascular necrosis. So this has changes much earlier than X-rays you can see. So I will move on to SCFE. This is a 14-year-old boy with a history of pain in the hip for 3 months. Have a close look at the X-ray. I'm going to post the questions now. So you have option A, pre-slip in the right hip. Option B, pre-slip in the left hip. C is early slip in the right hip. D is early slip in the left hip. E, none of the above. Nice. More than 50% of them have got the right answer of pre-slip in the left hip. Sorry, it's actually an early slip. It's not a pre-slip. So you can see the lateral view, which shows that it is a early slip. Pre-slip is very difficult to find on X-rays. It's an MRI diagnosis usually. So let's move on to the case. This is actually the patient, how the patient presented to me, but you should know the story, what happened before this actually. So this was the first X-ray when the child had pain in the left hip, and this X-ray was taken, and he saw an orthopedic surgeon, and the surgeon told that the X-ray was reported as normal by the radiologist or whatever in the scan center, and the child was sent back with NSAIDs. Surprisingly, at the same time, the lateral view also was taken, but the slip was so subtle and it was missed completely. Next, after 1 month, he had persistent pain again. So he visits another orthopedic surgeon. You can see that that the previous X-ray was done in February and this was in March. This X-ray was taken. This was diagnosed as growth pain and the child was reassured and again sent back on NSAIDs. So the child has visited 2 orthopedic surgeons. Both of them have missed the diagnosis. And later on, so this is a sequence from February, March, and then after 3 months, he came to us with a frank early slip. So why this happens? So it is all, you should know basic rules of a diagnosing a slip capital femoral epiphysis in a child. So whenever you see a child or an adolescent with a hip pain, it is mandatory to take 2 views. You always should ask for a AP view and a frog-leg lateral view. If you take a frog-leg lateral view, the chance that you pick up a slip is much more than on a AP view. And in the AP view, you will be able to see subtle signs of slip capital femoral. This is the first X-ray where the child had hip pain. And if you see the AP view, it is easy to overlook and say that this is normal. But for trained eyes, you can pick up the subtle abnormalities. You see that there is haziness of the physis. You compare with the opposite side all the time. This is the normal side physis, and you can see that this physis is widened and irregular. So this is one of the important signs. And if you draw what we call the Kleins line, This is compared to opposite side. This is the Klein's line is cutting abnormally in the femoral epiphysis. And these are all the other signs which you need to know. So Treth-Owen sign is again based on the Klein's line. When it is not cutting the epiphysis, you say that it's a positive Treth-Owen sign. Capinus sign is the overlap of the metaphysis is lost here. So the neck metaphysis usually overlaps here the acetabulum. So when you lose this, it is called the Capinus sign or the sham sign and metaphyseal blanch. So you have actually all the signs in this. You can see here there is a triangular overlap of the metaphysis of the neck on the right side, but here it is not there. So all the classical signs of slip is seen in this one X-ray. It is just that you need to look at it very carefully to diagnose this. You actually don't need a lateral view to say that there is a slip. Even if you are given an AP view, you should be able to pick up this SCFE, which is very mild. So this is the Klein's line, and you can see that it is completely different. So this is actually, this was published in 2009, what we call it as a modified Klein's line. And they say that you compare with the opposite side, you draw another line at the articular margin of the femoral head and measure the distance between both the sides. If the difference is more than 2 millimeters, it increases the sensitivity to diagnose an early slip. So what would you do in this child? This is a straightforward case for in situ pinning. So that was what was done. And we tend to do prophylactic pinning for the opposite hip. Again, it is controversial. So generally prophylactic pinning is indicated if the child is obese, if it is atypical slip where the child is younger than 12 or 10 years of age, or if there is associated endocrinopathy and obesity. So all these are the classical indications to do prophylactic pinning. And there is something called the posterior slope angle, which you measure in the frog leg lateral view. And if the posterior slope angle is more than 12 degrees, again, it is an indication to do a prophylactic pinning. Let's move to the next case. This is a 17-year-old boy who presented with left knee pain for 1 month, and the pain aggravates on activities. The left knee was clinically normal, and the surgeon initially treated the knee pain symptomatically, but the pain did not subside. So 2 weeks later, the surgeon asked for a knee MRI, and the knee MRI was reported as normal. Since there was persistent pain and the parents were also complaining continuously, they decided to go ahead and do a arthroscopy, diagnostic arthroscopy of the knee joint and see what is the problem in the knee joint. So this is again a common problem. This is again one of the common presentations of SCFE, knee pain. And luckily for this patient, while he was admitted and an inpatient in the hospital, he had a trivial fall and developed pain in the hip joint. And this is the X-ray of the patient. So let's have the question now. What would you do for this patient? Gentle reduction and screw fixation, in situ screw fixation, modified Dunn's procedure, any of the above. Good. 45% of them have told for gentle reduction and screw fixation. In situ fixation 20%, modified Dunn 30%. Okay, so again, this classically shows the variation in practice when it comes to an unstable slip. So this is a very classical case of unstable slip capital femoral epiphysis. And the correct answer here is actually any of the above. You can do any of the 3 things which is told. So gentle reduction and screw fixation, of course, it is controversial, but I personally believe that there is a role for gentle reduction and screw fixation. As long as you understand what do you mean by gentle reduction and you do not force forcefully reduce the slip, then it is okay to do a gentle reduction and screw fixation. In situ screw fixation is the gold standard. So if somebody asks you in the exam, and preferable answer to be given is in situ screw fixation, because gentle reduction is sort of controversial. Modified Dunn's procedure, again, now it is becoming a standard of care. It is well accepted across the world, but the problem is associated with a high rate of complications like avascular necrosis and chondrolysis, and you need an expertise to do the procedure. So any of the above is the right answer, but I'll show what we did for this patient. So this is the pre-reduction intraoperative CM image, and this is after what we call the positional reduction. After anesthesia, you gently just a touch of internal rotation. You should not force it. I do not use a fracture table for fixing this. For slip capital femoral epiphysis is routinely done on radial loosen table, and this is the positional reduction. You can see that I have accepted some amount of deformity. From a severe slip, I have converted this into a mild slip. So doing an in situ fixation, screw fixation in this position is not only very difficult. So you have to start really anterior to get a good purchase of the screw. Also, it will not give much of a symptomatic relief to the patient. Of course, the instability part, pain will go off, but the child will have severe impingement because the neck is already touching the acetabular margin here. Whereas in this, we have converted this severe slip to mild slip by positional reduction, and after that, we fixed it with the screw in situ. And after that, this is the bump which is impinging. So after this, what I do is we check for impingement. Intraoperatively, we do the flexion internal rotation test, which is we flex the hip to 90 degrees and internally rotate and check whether there is impingement. So if at 90 degrees of flexion, if your internal rotation is more than 10 to 15 degrees, then we know that there is no active impingement which is happening, and you can follow up the child closely for development of symptoms of FAI. But if you're not having plus 15 degrees of internal rotation, then it is an indication to do a osteoplasty. Again, this is also controversial because people still believe in remodeling of SCFE, but I personally prefer to do osteoplasty in the same setting, because through a small anterior open incision, a modified Smith-Peterson approach, we expose the bump here and just burr it off. So that, and you can dynamically check intraoperatively, you will be able to see the bump hitting the labrum, and after you remove the bump, you will have an impingement free range of movement. So this is after osteoplasty, the same child, and that's the 2 years follow-up. There is no AVN, and you can see that the head neck offset is restored very well. So this is one of the ways to treat unstable slip capital femoral epiphysis. So only thing is, you as a student, if you are asked in exam how will you treat an unstable SCFE, still I think you should say that it is in situ fixation. But there is no harm in saying what is practiced in your institution also. So you can say that in our institution they do modified Dunn's, or they do gentle reduction and screw fixation. But you need to remember that unstable slip is one which is based on, it's having a higher rate of avascular necrosis, and I hope you all know the Lotus classification, which divides slip into stable and unstable. Unstable slip is one in which the child is not able to weight bear and walk even with the help of a walker. Let's move on to the next case. This is a 16-year-old boy. Okay, so he is having left hip pain and limp on the right side for 1 year. He's able to walk. So I wanted to show one unstable slip and one stable slip. So this is a sort of little complicated case, but I'll run through it. So how will you proceed with this case? Which hip to choose, and what is the procedure which will you do, and what is the timeline you are going to do? So if you look at this carefully, the child presented with the problem on the pain in the left hip, but on the right hip, the problem is there for much longer time. And you can see the deformity is much more on the right side, but he's not having much complaints on the right side. So you can do it however you wish to do, but this is a very difficult problem to tackle because this is like a malunited or very chronic slip, severe chronic slip, whereas this one is not that severe, but this again, it is a stable chronic slip here. So what we decided to do is to do a modified Dunn's procedure on the left side, because that was more sort of acute than compared to the opposite side. And you can tackle this amount of slip easily compared to this amount of deformity. So we did a modified Dunn on the left side. And just to walk you through the steps, modified Dunn's procedure is done through the safe surgical dislocation approach. You expose the head and you can see this is the amount of deformity in the left hip. Actually, this is the neck, and your epiphysis is gone back here. This is actually a raw bone of the neck, and you raise the retinacular flap and you'll have to remove some amount of neck, osteotomize the neck, and then reposition it to see. So typically we drill the epiphysis and see for bleeding. And if you're seeing active bleeding like this, then you're happy that the head is alive at the end of the procedure. So this particular patient also, it's very interesting to see this. He had very good bleeding. You can see that. And that's a 6 weeks follow-up. At 3 months, he underwent a neck osteotomy on the right side. Again, it is also a modified Dunn's procedure, but you do a osteotomy at a different level because the slip is not mobile. The slip is already healed. So here we mobilized the epiphysis through the physis because the physis was open. Here the physis is completely closed. So you do an osteotomy at the neck level and then correct the deformity. And you can see that at 5 months, there is some issue going on in the left hip. There is some decrease in the joint space, adaptive changes in the acetabulum. And at 8 months from the initial procedure, you can see that there is concentric decrease in the joint space. So he has developed chondrolysis. So we were worried about AVN, but to our surprise, he developed chondrolysis and he was very stiff. He was developing a very stiff hip. We did an intra-articular injection at that time. And this is 1 year after the index procedure. The hip was looking not doing very great. Luckily, he escaped on the right side where he had a more complex procedure, but he did not develop either AVN nor chondrolysis. So this hip was doing well. This was stiff. And we, at this point, I suggested him that we'll open up and do a osteochondroplasty to correct the head neck offset. So, but the patient refused. And after 1.5 years, to our surprise, we saw that the joint space is coming back. So about, I would say that 50% of patients with chondrolysis, they, again, the cartilage regenerates and they do well. So this is at 2 years. And on the left side, he's having restriction of internal rotation in flexion, but otherwise he's doing well. He's very happy with the outcome. He's able to walk normally, and this is he's able to sit cross-legged. He's able to squat, and you can see that on the left side there is restriction of internal rotation. He's not able to have. He's not having internal rotation. And I hope that this hip will last for a few more years before it lands up with an arthroplasty surgeon. Want me to continue or shall we stop? We have discussed one unstable, one stable, and one mild slip. Deepak?
You can continue. You can continue, sir.
I have one more case, I think.
Yeah.
So this is again an interesting story of a 14-year-old boy. So he's having limp for 4 months, was seen by orthopedic surgeon again. So you can see that it was in 2010 December. Very clear case of skiffy on the left hip. I'm not going to go through this. So do you need additional imaging here? No doubt you need a lateral view, and this was the lateral view. The surgeon did a lateral view also, and he did an MRI also for this patient. So you can see how much is the slip here. This is the neck here, and this is the epiphysis. So it's like almost a 90-degree deformity. And the surgeon told that the child is not having any pain, so no need to do anything at present. So the observation was the treatment offered for this child. 2 months later, again the lymph was persisting. They went to the same surgeon. X-rays were repeated. So again, 4 months later, he went back to the same surgeon. This time, for a change, MRI was repeated again. But no treatment was offered. They told that it will become all right by itself. And then he had his grade 10 exams. He neglected his limb completely, and he comes back to the same surgeon after 18 months again. And you can see in 2012 how the deformity has changed. So this is a very classical example to show what happens when you neglect a slip. This shows a natural history of chronic stable slip capital femoral epiphysis. So the problem with chronic stable slips is it is not that much painful. It's a very subtle pain, and particularly when the child is exerting, there will be pain. The limp is also mild, and if you don't treat them properly, this is what happens. The deformity chronically, slowly the epiphysis starts slipping, and you develop a very bad deformity or ugly deformity. So the surgeon again told to review after board exams. He did not change the management pattern as such. After this 3 months later, after this episode, he developed pain in the right hip, and that is when he presented to us. So the patient also realized that something is going on in the right hip. So something is abnormal with him, and he decided to change the orthopedic surgeon finally, and he came to us. So the management is going to be similar to the patient which I showed recently in the previous case. Again, bilateral chronic stable slip. One side is mild. I mean, you can tackle it on the right side easily by doing a modified den. And I wanted to show the scan. So this is what we call as the banana neck deformity. So here the physis is open. You can do a modified den by doing an osteotomy here, mobilize the epiphysis, and you have to resect this amount of bone, and you can reposition the epiphysis. On this side, you can see that the physis is almost closed. Up to here only it is open. Beyond that, it is completely closed. So if you try to do a modified den on this through the physis, it will be a disaster. So you will land up in problems. So it is better to do a neck osteotomy wherein you cut the bone here, and then you take a wedge and you correct the deformity. So we did a modified den on the right side. This is a 3 months follow-up. On the left side, I did not do anything. This was an early part of my career. You can see it was in 2012. I did not have the courage to do a neck osteotomy for him. So I did a surgical dislocation and did an osteochondroplasty. I just shaved off the bump which was impinging to give some amount of internal rotation and impingement-free range of motion. So this is also one of the acceptable treatments. You can do this in combination with the classical Southwick or Imosier osteotomy, where you correct the varus and the external rotation. So I thought of doing the subtrochanteric osteotomy in the second stage. So initially we did the osteochondroplasty. I told him we will do the subtrochanteric osteotomy in the second stage. The patient never came for follow-up after that, I think. So this is 1 year from the time of presentation to us. He did not develop AVN on the right side. This is 6 months from the second procedure. And he's happy with his hip, I think. He never came back for follow-up after that. So he must be around 25 now. Thank you. So that's the end of both the topics. I hope I did some justice to the talks.
It was an indeed informative and interactive presentation, sir. It was very precise and specific, and you have covered very well. And I'm sure that it's helpful to the postgraduate, not only for the exam point of view, as well as to the day-to-day practice as well, sir. I think there are no questions, sir, but you have presented so well. I think there are no doubts. Thanks for your valuable time, sir. And it was a pleasure listening to the experts, sir. So thanks for
Thank you.
coming here and presenting this.
Thank
Sir,
you.
Thank you, Deepak.
Thank you, Venkatadas. It was
Sir, thank you, sir.
I really updated my knowledge as well today, as usual. You know, we keep learning every day. In that way,
Yes, sir.
I learned quite a bit from you today. I'm very much thankful to you. I am sure all the postgraduates were benefited by your lectures, and it will be very useful for them in your examination as well, and also in their future practice. That is very important. As you said, many cases are still being missed by the spoofing. They all have arthroscopy done. I had 1 or 2 cases as well. So it's very common. Thank you very much. And
Thank you,
God
sir.
bless you. God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Pleasure, sir. Thank you. Good night to all of you, sir. Thank you.
good night, sir. Good night, sir.
Next week.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
The reminder for the next class, it's going to be the topic going to be the tuberculosis of bone and joint by Professor Anil K. Jain from New Delhi. It is on the 10th of July on 8 to 9 p.m. on the Zoom platform as well as on YouTube. So kindly join in large number and get benefited out. So last but not least, thanks to the organizers and the support given by the Crossland Sun Pharma Division and the technical support given by the Hallmark events. Thanks everyone for joining, and good night, and see you on 10th of July.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, sir. Thank you, sir.